What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some essential tips for Elden Ring. Now, this is primarily geared towards beginners, and if you are familiar with the Soulsbourne type of game, you will, for the most part, know some of this stuff. However, I will be mentioning one or two specific things that might help just about everybody with this particular game. But with no further ado, let's jump straight into it. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is class. Now, this one is absolutely for beginners. So your class is going to set your starting equipment as well as your base stats to quite a different degree, frankly. Honestly, the beginning of the game is largely dependent on the class you choose in the sense of how difficult it's going to be for you, because some classes are just better equipped for the types of enemies that you'll face than others. So ultimately, the class you want to pick is still going to be whatever is closest to the play style that you want and has the starting gear that you want. But if you're new to the game, what I would suggest is actually creating a burner character of sorts. That way you can get a feel for the game a little bit, as well as an idea of what the individual stats actually do for you. And then you can pick a class that might be more in line with what you think those stats do, which will be pretty helpful. But the primary thing to know is that it sets your starting equipment as well as your stats, which is going to influence how you build and level that character. Now, next up, we have the map. The first and most obvious tip is obviously just explore the map. But what I want to give here is a tip for getting started for the actual game, and that is what section of the map is the most friendly for you, frankly. And that is specifically the area you start the game in is obviously relatively safe. However, the plot is going to kind of push you towards, I believe it's Stormfall Castle. And while you can go there straight out of the gate, you're going to meet some heavy resistance with a difficult boss fight right as you enter that area. And I wouldn't recommend actually going there until you are at least level 20. But honestly, higher would be better. So with that in mind, where you probably want to start exploring is of course the area that you start the game in. But then from there, go south to an area called the Weeping Peninsula. This area has relatively weaker enemies compared to the castle. Also, what's available there are a lot of upgrades, such as smithing stones, or upgrades to your flasks, which we're about to jump into. So the next tip, again, more for beginners here, is upgrade your flasks. So your Crimson tier and Cerulean tier flasks are how you restore your health and or your mana or your FP, I believe it's called, which is how you cast your spells or abilities. But these flasks have to be upgraded to stay relevant. You can upgrade them in two ways. One will give you more charges per rest, if you will, which will allow you to use them more often. And then the second upgrade increases the amount of restoration that they provide. Now that in and of itself is a pretty simple concept that the game actually explains to you, but I would like to take that one step further and point you in the direction of how to upgrade those things and where to look for the upgrades. And these are primarily the tiny golden trees you can run into, as well as the ruined churches that you'll find throughout the land. Now, the small golden trees, you'll actually see one as you leave the starter dungeon, if you will. At the base of these trees, you will tend to find golden seeds, which are needed for the upgrades. And then in the ruined churches, you will almost always find a sacred tier, which will also upgrade your flasks. And a big part of the exploration of running around the world is running into those two things, so you can keep your flasks up to date. And I found that finding those areas tend to be the most rewarding part of exploring, in my opinion. But from there, our fourth tip is how to upgrade your basic items. Now, if you're a veteran of the series, you absolutely know this, but in order for your weapons to be relevant and really do any decent damage, you need to upgrade them. This is done through a smith with smithing stones, primarily. Now, in order to get access to the smith, you need to be able to go to Round Table Hold. The main story is going to take you there after you rest so many times, I believe, at a grace point. An NPC will offer to take you to Round Table Hold. So you'll go there, there is a smith there who will upgrade your armaments for you, which is your weapons. And in order to do this, you need to provide the smithing stones of the appropriate tier, as well as the runes for the cost. Now, you can upgrade your weapons a great deal, honestly. However, the key thing to remember is to upgrade your weapon constantly, as that's the only way your damage is going to stay relevant. Moreover, there are different damage types, etc., depending on the weapon you're using. But basically, you need to find a weapon that you plan on using quite a bit and stick to upgrading that one. Because while you can farm enemies for smithing stones if you really need to, you can find a lot of them actually in the Weeping Peninsula, and upgrading one specific weapon to get you through the early game can help a great deal. And for our fifth and final tip, specific to this game, really, for the most part, is summoning. Summoning has always been a thing in the Soulsbourne series in quite a few ways, in the sense that other players could invade your realm or you could summon other players to help you, etc. In some cases, you can even summon NPCs into boss fights to help you out with that boss fight. But what I'm talking about here is none of that. In this particular game, it is possible to use combat summons, if you will, to aid your character, and you can actually get one of the most useful ones almost immediately. However, the summons are then upgradable afterwards through a spirit tuner. In order to summon at all, once you get to Round Table Hold, you'll need to talk to a witch in there who will sell you a spirit bell. It's actually pretty cheap. It's just 100 runes. You need to buy that because that is what enables you to use the summons. Summons can be found through a variety of means, through exploration, through beating certain bosses. However, you can buy one of the most useful ones from the same witch that sells you the spirit bell, and that is the 3 Lone Wolf summon. Now, you can use these the same way you use anything else by assigning it to your consumable hotbar slot, if you will. But in order to use them, a couple of things need to happen. For starters, you need to already have that spirit bell, because if you don't have that, you can't summon anything. But moreover, you can only use your summons in certain areas and certain boss fights. So in order to do so, you'll know that you are in an area where you are allowed to use summons by the little purple gravestone that you'll see on the left side of the screen. If you see that, you are allowed to use your summons, as well as the icon being lit up when you scroll over to it, if you will, on your radial menu there. Now, summons are incredibly effective, especially the lone wolf ones, because they will just drag the attention away from you, allowing you to focus on hitting the enemy. Now, beyond that, I said these summons are upgradable, and they are. However, you will have to do a little bit of work to make that happen. You will need to find an NPC named Roderica, who is on the path to Stormfall Castle initially. Once you talk to her and go to Round Table Hold, she will move to Round Table Hold. From here, you need to talk to her and the smith multiple times until she agrees to work for the smith, at which point she will become the spirit tuner. She will, in exchange for a certain type of plant that is usually found in dungeons, as well as a cost of runes, will upgrade your summons for you to keep them viable and useful. And again, that lone wolf summon that you get is very, very useful through most of the fights in the game, just because there's 3 of them, and they distract the enemy a ton, which makes your job much easier. But there you go, guys, some essential tips for getting started in Elden Ring. I certainly hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.